So if you take yourself back maybe 200 years, 1815, what would you see right here in Montour County? What would you see in Pennsylvania? In 1815, about 90% of the population in Pennsylvania were farmers. So you'd have a typical farm family that lived on a family farm and had a diverse family farm structure. And that's kind of what we have pictured over here. A typical farm would usually have a horse or a team of horses that would draw implements through the soil so they could work the soil with horsepower. You usually have a family milk cow, so with your milk cow you'd get all your milk that you needed plus all your cheese and cream products, and then the extra milk, because a typical Jersey cow for instance makes 5 gallons a day, most families wouldn't drink that much milk, so they'd give the excess milk to their pigs and they'd fatten the pigs and then they'd have food for the winter. So you'd have horses and cows and pigs, and of course you'd have chickens to kind of scratch through all the manure, and the chickens would sterilize and keep the flies down, and the back end they spit out these eggs that are high in nutrition. And that kind of farming 200 years ago is what we would call today organic farming, because it was free from any chemical inputs. And it was diverse. So that had a lot of benefits. It had a lot of benefit in terms of controlling disease. They call it pathogen confusion, because the diseases that would affect the cow couldn't take hold when you rotated the pigs through there the next time you'd move your cows around. So they'd constantly been rotating the animals and the crops. In Pennsylvania, as it turns out, particularly southeast Pennsylvania, had some of the richest soil that the new settlers actually encountered. So Lancaster County, for instance, has really great soil. So when these families came across 1800s, they started working the soil and farming, and the crop yields were really high. So they were making a lot of food. And from 1720 to 1840, so that 120-year period, Pennsylvania was the highest food producer in the 13 colonies. So more food came out of Pennsylvania than any other state. And that was because of the rich topsoil that we had. But what happened as people plowed the ground and they took that nice organic layer that was on top, they plow it under. Now, I wanted to bring a plow down here and actually get on the tractor and demonstrate. If anyone's ever plowed ground, it's fun. It's fun to see that soil rolling over, but you're taking all that rich organic stuff, you're burying it 10 inches down, and you're bringing the subsoil up to the surface. And what happens is that subsoil is then exposed, and erosion takes place. Wind and water, rain washes it away. So what the settlers notice is over the course of the next 100 years or so, decade by decade, crop yields decreased and they declined, and so families moved west. They went out into the Ohio River Valley, and then they went out into the Mississippi River Valley. And when they got out to the Midwest, the topsoil out there that they encountered wasn't measured in inches, it was measured in feet. 8 to 12 feet of topsoil in the American Midwest when the settlers hit. There are accounts, you can get on the internet and read about accounts of man on horseback riding through the prairie, and the grasses were higher than the guy's head. You can imagine grass 10 feet high. And so those were the days when the buffaloes roamed, and we write songs about that stuff, but the buffaloes would sort of move across the prairie, mow down all that grass, fertilize it out the back end, and they'd move on to new grass. So constantly building soil, building topsoil. So back to Pennsylvania, as the topsoil was being eroded, families had to figure out how to make more food. And over the course of the 1800s, crop yields declined, and it was around the turn of the 20th century, so we're talking 1890s, early 1900s, scientists actually predicted that the human population was actually going to come to a standstill, because America was the food producer of the world at that point, and the topsoil rate of decline was not going to be able to sustain the rate of human growth. So there was a prediction here that if we can't grow more food, the population is going to come to a halt. And some scientists had actually figured out, if you take any given plant, all these plants around us, you take any of these plants and you give them 3 things, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, they'll grow better. NPK, those are the 3 numbers on the bag of fertilizer you get. You get 10, 10, 10, or 20, 20, 20, it's nitrogen, potassium, nitrogen, phosphate, potassium. And it turns out that it's very, very difficult to get nitrogen into the soil. So back before chemical fertilizers, and this is just 100 years ago, we did not have a way to actually supplement nitrogen in our soil. The only 2 ways you could do it were to plant legumes, so you could plant beans, locust trees, alfalfa, and that would add nitrogen to the soil, or he'd wait for a storm to come by. When the lightning strikes, it would actually cleave atmospheric nitrogen into a soluble form and go into the soil. So the big goal for scientists really around the world at the turn of the 20th century was to figure out a way to fix atmospheric nitrogen so we could add it to the soil. And there was a man, a German scientist, named Fritz Haber. Anybody ever hear of him? Hey guys. Anybody ever hear of the Haber-Bosch process? Probably not. There's a scientist who worked for the German government in 1909. He figured out that you could actually take nitrogen, N2, two nitrogen atoms that are linked together, very stable molecule. And you could cleave that under high temperature and pressure with hydrogen, and you make ammonia, NH3. And those ammonium compounds could be added to the soil to increase crop yields. But what happened in the 1910s, Germany was getting ready for World War I. So all that nitrogen-based compound got put into ammunitions. So ammunition depots were formed, and they were forming huge stores and things to get ready for the war. And there was another guy named Karl Bosch who worked with this Fritz Haber guy, and they were able to increase production. Both of them actually ended up winning the Nobel Prize in 1931 for their ability to take atmospheric nitrogen and fix it. Of course, it was all used for war purposes at that point. So what happened in America, and the reason nobody knows about these two guys, by the way, is because their technology was also used to make all the poison gases that were used in the concentration camps. So they were credited with literally saving the world by figuring out how to supplement nitrogen back into the soil. Their names were written out of history books because of their association with Nazi Germany. But you can find this stuff, you look it up. So anyway, no one knows about Haber and Bosch, but we all are thankful for what they did, because estimates are that 3 out of 5 people on the planet today wouldn't be here if we wouldn't have figured out how to fix nitrogen to increase our crop yields. So fast forward to 1945, maybe. At that point, Muscle Shoals, Alabama, which is a town in Alabama, was the largest producer of ammonium compounds in the United States. Of course, they were all being used to fund the war effort. They were all being used for ammunition. And when Truman dropped the bomb, all of a sudden you had hundreds of thousands of tons of nitrate compounds they had no use for. So the government said, that's where farm policy started. The government said, spread it on the fields, and they spread it on the fields. You had a remarkable thing happen. You had all these people returning from the war, the baby boomer generation. They just come out of the Depression, and you got all this nitrogen you put on the soil, and your crop yields went like this, through the roof. And so that's the baby boomers. Those are the people I have to take care of at work. And so crop production went up, and that really fueled what we would call today conventional farming, fertilizer-based farming. And it turns out that corn ends up being one of the best responders to nitrogen. So almost our entire food economy now is based on corn. So if you go to the grocery store, you look in the grocery store, go down the shelves, there are about 45,000 different products in a grocery store, typical grocery store in America. Up to half of those are corn-based, supplemented with high fructose corn syrup and corn oils and corn this and corn that. So most of our diet over the past 60, 80 years has been corn-based. The problem with corn is that it takes a lot out of your soil. And in order to grow corn, you have to till the soil and prepare it. So what's happened over the course of 80 years or so corn farming is that we've taken our precious Midwest topsoil, our topsoil here in Montour County, and we plow it under and it gets washed away. Now they measure topsoil in the Midwest in inches, not feet. So it started out 8 to 12 feet, now we measure it in inches. That's our most precious resource. That's where we grow all our food. And the very top layer of the Earth's crust is what supports all the food in our lives. So what's this have to do with our health? Well, I'm going to get to it. So what's happened now is with our farming techniques, we basically take our topsoil, we plow it under, it washes away. We're losing topsoil right now at a rate of about 5 tons per acre per year. That's not a number I can really fathom, because I don't really know what 5 tons of topsoil is like unless I get a truckload of topsoil. There's a lot of topsoil, but that's what the government says an acceptable rate of loss. That actually ends up being about 200,000 tons per hour. Just think about that for a minute. 200,000 tons. So again, what's that have to do with our health? I'm going to get to it. So if you think about our soil and our topsoil being a precious resource, what we've done to our topsoil is we've depleted it nutritionally. And each year crop yields, in order to maintain steady crop yields, we have to add more and more fertilizer to our soil, and our soil is becoming more and more sterile. It's not capable of producing the food that it once did when settlers first hit. So there's some thought that heavy fertilizer application, and then of course today genetically modified crops, which require heavy doses of herbicides. We all use it at our home, Roundup. We put that on all our crops now. So heavy doses of Roundup and heavy doses of fertilizer are in our food supply, the stuff we eat. So when you go to the grocery store and you buy one of these 45,000 items off the shelf, you can actually find traces of all these herbicides and pesticides and things in the food that we eat. And it turns out right now there are growing rates of certain diseases that at least some people think are linked to these increasing doses of chemicals in our food. I think a lot of the evidence at this point is circumstantial, but it certainly makes you think. So for instance, just one of the diseases that's been implicated with higher doses of Roundup in our food is autism. So I looked up some data, and autism occurred about 1 in 5 or 10,000 kids about 100 years ago or 50 years ago. Now it's implicated 1 in 100 kids have autism. And if you look at the rate of growth of autism, it parallels the rate of the use of Roundup. It's circumstantial, but it makes you think. What about cardiovascular disease? Because that's what affects me. When you think about the rising rates of diabetes, high blood pressure, vascular disease, heart disease, certain cancers, and you look at the food that we eat, nutritionally deplete. And the soil's been depleted of its nutrient supply, and it grows food that is devoid of nutrients, and then we eat it. So we end up being devoid of nutrients. And if you think about it, you know, you can eat a bag of potato chips, and after you eat the whole bag, you're still hungry because you haven't given yourself any nutrition. So what happens if people eating food from the grocery store, they aren't satisfied, they keep eating, so we get obesity, and then we get other problems related to that. And then the healthcare system gets stressed because we have to deal with the effects of the food that we're eating. So how does this relate to Geisinger? Well, we're celebrating 100 years of Geisinger's presence here in Danville. And the institution obviously is growing and doing well, but those doctors who work there faced with treating all these diseases, we don't know how to treat them. One of the fastest growing subspecialties is allergy and immunology. Did you know that, Vic? Allergy and immunology, one of the fastest growing specialties. Our soil is so sterile that our kids can't build up an immune system. It's crazy to think about. So we've got all these new diseases we have to tackle. So what I wanted to demonstrate today is a different way of treating the soil. The concept of feeding the soil and keeping the soil healthy. Because if the soil's healthy, the plants that grow in the soil will be healthy, and the animals and the people that eat those plants will be healthy. And it makes sense. So look around us. Look at the hills here. The only exposed dirt that I can see is the infield, and I see a power line up there. There's maybe a little bit of exposed soil. You look around us, look right under your feet. You don't see any soil here. You don't see it, it's covered. Every living thing that God made is covered. We have skin. We have dermatologists sitting right here. Vic, is the skin important? Vic would argue it's the most important organ in the body. All the animals have hides. God gave them hides and hair and fur. The chickens have feathers. If you went over in the creek and found a minnow, it would have scales. It's covered. Nothing living is left bare to nature. You have to think of the soil as a living organism. You have to think of the soil as being alive, and you have to remember that things that are alive need to be covered, they need to be watered, they need to be fed. So if you take your soil and you constantly add organic content to the surface of your soil, you're going to cover it, so you protect it from the sun, you protect it from the wind and the rain. That soil never erodes away, it doesn't end up in the Chesapeake Bay. That organic covering that you put on top of your soil acts like a sponge. And every time it rains, it poured this morning. I was worried for Van because I thought the whole day was going to be a washout. It poured down this morning. All this stuff, Emily planted this blueberry bush and these strawberry bushes yesterday, donated by Brookside Nursery. My daughter planted those, and all this stuff in here gathered up. Look at it. It's wet. All that rain that came down, it's sitting right in here. So we can go for weeks now with drought, and these plants, they'll be watered. Watered from all the rain that got soaked up in that organic stuff. And it just so happens when organic matter breaks down, it's carbon-based, right? It mixes with oxygen, it forms carbon dioxide. And that carbon dioxide, which is sitting there underneath all this stuff, when water hits it, it forms carbonic acid. And carbonic acid releases all the minerals in our soil that our plants need to grow. So you don't have to fertilize. It's amazing. So if you look in the woods, that's exactly how God does it in the woods. And we need to copy what we see in creation, not turn our topsoil over and see it wash away. So that's what we do at our farm. It's not really a farm, it's just our family home, but we kind of run it like what would be a farm from a couple of hundred years ago. And we took some pictures here of kids in the garden and different things that you would see. And if you look here, this is Abby, our daughter. She's picking green beans, and if you look at the ground here next to the green bean plants, that was probably a week ago, you don't see any soil. All you see is grass clippings that have mulched down. There's no weeds, you don't have to pull weeds. The soil is constantly fed, even in a drought or rain, it's got the same moisture content, and the kids can walk through and not step on the plants because they know what's a plant and what's a weed. When there are weeds, they'd come out real easy. There are some peas that we had growing up through a leaf mulch. The corn, mulched in straw. That's a picture of the whole garden up there. You don't see any bare soil except where we have the pigs, and we use the pigs to turn up the soil, and then we throw seed down. They called a packet for us. They push the seeds in the ground, we pull them off, and then the plants grow. And I wanted to show something there. That picture in yellow highlight there, my daughter Emily pulling potatoes out of the ground. You see her pulling those potatoes out of the ground with her bare hands. That garden was right up on top of this hill on Bald Top. When Tasha and I moved here 4 years ago, we moved up on Bald Top, and there was no topsoil. I scraped the grass away, and it was rock. I said, how am I going to grow a vegetable garden on rock? So I started thinking about this stuff, and I started hauling in as much as I could, organic. Eli gave me bales of junk hay he didn't need. I got leaf mulch, grass clippings, whatever. We were there 4 years. 4 short years. Look at this picture. There's a foot of good topsoil right there, and it's so loose. Emily's picking potatoes with her hands. That's amazing stuff. You just add to the soil. So that's what we do. Now, how does that affect our health? Well, when you got kids that are out in the soil, digging around, and it's healthy soil and making healthy plants, and that's what you're feeding your family, you're gonna be healthier. And so that's what we're trying to do at our place, is to grow healthy foods and live in more of a way in tune with how God created nature, and get away from the conventional farming methods that really destroy the topsoil. So somebody's going to ask, well, you know, what can I do at my place? Well, there are a couple things. I thought about this, and I'm going to give you a handful of suggestions. One, support the farmers market. Saturday morning comes, go down to Ferry Street and start buying the vegetables and the produce from the people here in Montour County that are growing it. And actually demand of them that they grow it chemical-free. Because they'll actually have signs up on their corn, chemical-free corn. That's what you want. You want corn that was grown the way that didn't have chemicals on it. Plant your own garden. If you've got some grass in your yard, make a space for a garden. You don't even have to till it up. Just throw some cardboard down over the grass, put some mulch down, throw your plants in. They'll grow. You keep feeding it with organic stuff. Third thing, support farmers that have grass-based farming operations. Now, why is that? When farmers farm grass, think about how grass grows. Grass grows up, but when grass is growing up and the blade's growing up, the root's growing down too. And when you cut that grass, that root dies back and adds more organic content to the soil. So something as simple as cutting the grass actually improves soil structure and soil fertility. So if you know any grass-based farmers like Eli, support them. Because the guys that are growing grass are helping the soil. And there are other farms around here like Forks Farm in Orangeville and Owens Farm in Sunbury. They have grass-based farm systems. Support those folks. and try to get away from the stuff you buy in the grocery store.